Hey everyone, welcome to this live and having a very interesting topic here today about why are avoidant attachers so hated. I'm going to see how I go with this because depending on my health and also the battery power of my phone, one of those two is going to go out faster than the other. So we'll see how it goes. And for such a big topic as well too. This is not going to be a Ken Read segment. I ain't reading out anyone's letters. Today I just wanted to discuss this topic on why avoidance is so hated because I feel as though it's a very big thing on the internet to dish out on avoidance, and I'm going to be completely honest, I think at times it's very valid, the amount of anger and hate that avoidant attachers get for their behavior. And so this is going to be a discussion where I talk, well, not really a discussion, more of it's going to be a series of statements from myself, basically explaining why I think avoidant attachers are so hated, whether they be dismissive and fearful avoidant. Because I think that whilst not every avoidant attacher is a bad person and also certainly isn't as bad as the people I'm about to describe, there are definitely a lot of bad eggs in that attachment group that have contributed to the mess that we're in with dating. So keen to discuss this shortly. But before I do, I just want to say to anyone who's interested, please feel free to leave your questions for me in the question mark box below. I also want to state that if you are an avoidantly attached person who is listening to this live, which I know would be very triggering, I just want to state that I'm referring to people who are not taking accountability for their side of the street, who are also not taking any attempts to try and rectify the wrongs they have committed to partners, friends, loved ones through their fear of intimacy. I'm talking to the people who have shown time and time again to continue involving themselves in relationships where they know they have a known issue and continue to cause a lot of systemic trauma for people. If you are part of this group and you are also working on yourself to not be like this, fantastic. I think you're doing an amazing job because I know how hard it is. But if you're not, I think we can safely say you're on the outside looking into people who actually are not really taking the same steps that you are. So with that delineation out of the way, let's build the kind of avoidant that I'm thinking of that would be, the basis for all this hate. So let's start out with saying this. This is a very interesting topic because on one hand, why is it that, this one attachment group, even if we divide it between fearfuls and dismissives, tends to get so much hate compared to anxious attachers or people who, might be securely attached for some reason if people don't like secures? I think it's because there's a particular way in which avoidant attachers, particularly those that are more extreme, hurt people in dating that is characteristically unique to their style of relating, that is so radically different from those that are more anxiously attached. And even though some people will bleat and be like, but it's not fair, anxious attachers have their side of the street to work on, this is a very lopsided issue that we're dealing with. If it was as simple as, well, anxious attachers are bad because they do all these things which we can measure and also have significant impact on other people, then I think we would be talking about it more frequently, which we're not. Frankly, a lot of the discussion that has come out of dating literature, romance novels, and psychotherapy books have been referring to emotionally unavailable people, where the vast majority that are described fit the description of someone who has a pretty severe avoidant attachment style. And frankly, I don't think at times there is room for balance in what is a very unbalanced experience that a lot of people go through. So with that little prefacing out of the way, I do want to say that whilst, yes, severe anxious attacher behavior is deeply problematic, as I've described in many, many videos, I think the fact of the matter is it's just different from the way in which severe avoidant attachment behavior plays itself out in dating and relationships. And that's why it's so villainized in its own way for the shape, the way in which it plays out for a lot of people in their relationships. Another thing also to think about too is that when it comes to dating avoidant attachers as well, because they're so fundamentally different in terms of their wiring, their behavior, their personality at times to those that are more anxiously inclined, it has got a lot of, let's just say, issues for people who are trying to build and facilitate a relationship with them because of a lot of their own resistances to dating. So let me just paint my definition of someone who is like a severe avoidant attacher. We're talking someone who on the surface has a lot of great qualities. They might work in, a highly demanding job where they're very successful on paper, they're very good looking, they seem to have a lot of friends, they're very active, they have a decent seeming social life, they're very charming, intelligent, and very engaging to get along with for the most part. But when it comes to facilitating a more deep and meaningful relationship, that's when shit really hits the fan. And it's not just this, it's just not little things. It's really significant things that get people into a state where they can be really hurt and traumatized off the back of it. Let's start with the beginning. Many avoidant attachers are not open and upfront with the fact that they have a fear of intimacy. And on one hand, I kind of get it. A lot of people don't want to admit that they have a fear of anything. But the problem is that a fear of intimacy isn't just like, say, a fear of heights. A fear of intimacy in dating is one of the most crucial elements that needs to be discussed early on in dating, because if your partner does not know that information, then they don't have the right to make a decision as to whether or not to proceed with you if you're not someone who's working through that. An avoidant argument might be, but then no one will date me. Not true at all. And I can say that given the fact that many people do continue to date individuals who have an avoidant attachment style, just as you would if this was an STD related issue as well too. The fact of the matter is that this is still relevant information. The other thing too is that a fear of intimacy often entails some problems that will come out down the line, such as when things become deeper in the relationship, there's usually a shutdown episode followed by issues where the relationship or situationship will deteriorate either very slowly or very abruptly, and you, the partner who, is dating this avoidant, are going to be left with the pieces of this and are often left in a pretty bad way where you're doing, sometimes months of therapy to recover, and it takes you quite a while to heal from this experience where you may feel like you've just lost your soulmate. So if that person isn't getting this information, if that person you're dating isn't being told you have a fear of intimacy, and it leads them to then be in a position where they end up being in a lot of pain, hurt as a consequence of this, then you are doing a lot of harm, damage, and being emotionally abusive to someone when you should know I've got a problem that's affecting other people. Which leads into issue number 2 of why avoidance is so hated in my experience, which is a lot of them know they have a fear of intimacy and that they know that there's something wrong with them. And yet, in spite of this knowledge of their own flaws and defects, they continue to go out and date regardless. This is problematic because even if I understand the reasons as to why they do what they do, the problem is that many people end up getting really hurt as a consequence. If you are going to continue to go out with said problem, bleeding on people when you're out there dating, and you don't actually take accountability and responsibility for your side of the street, then of course you are now an active participant in a bigger problem of dating, which is you are causing people to have unnecessary heartbreak, trauma, betrayal trauma, and a whole bunch of other related symptoms that people just simply don't need to go through. If you know you have an issue, just like if you knew you have an STD, you need to speak to people about it to have a proper treatment plan and also to have steps to make sure that you're doing your due diligence not to hurt other people. Otherwise, you are part of a systemic issue that needs to be addressed. If you are an avoidant attacher who also is really, let's just say, finds it hard to navigate conflict, and you're also the one who's starting a lot of the conflict around breaking up a relationship over nothing, then this is another reason as to why you might also be hated as a consequence. If you're someone who's not wanting to own up for your side of the street, if you're someone who's so sensitive to conversations around compatibility and how to make a relationship work, where you take everything so personally, and think that if I'm being attacked by this person, then, oh my God, it means the relationship is shit. Therefore, we should end things and I'm doing everyone a favor. You're not actually doing either of you a favor. Just because you feel like a bad person does not mean the relationship, therefore, is crap as well, too. There needs to be real context for why you're feeling this way. Are you being triggered because this is your I am a bad person wound that's being activated? Or are you in a relationship that is genuinely not functional or healthy? They are two separate things entirely. And whilst they can at times, overlap, you need to have that discernment. Otherwise, you're doing a lot of harm, breaking up over, let's figure out where we're going to go for dinner, as opposed to figuring out, is this relationship making me feel unsafe because this person I'm dating is making me feel like I'm a loser, like I'm a terrible human being, because they keep telling me things, gaslighting me, making me out to be such a horrible person. They're not the same thing. And so that's why, when it comes down to why are avoidants hated, because they're also bad at conflict resolution and managing conflict and being able to deal with the ins and outs of relationships where there are issues, because they take a lot of these things way too personally. I mentioned before, gaslighting. I'm going to throw it out there as well too. Another reason as to why avoidants are hated is because whenever they're confronted over their deactivating behavior, what do they sometimes do? They gaslight their partner into thinking, you're too much, you're being too needy, you are making this so much more harder than it needs to be, why can't you just accept it for what it is? And that's not okay. If you are someone who has unilaterally decided to end a relationship or situationship and you're not willing to communicate the reasons as to why you did what you did, then that's on you to take ownership and accountability for that. And that's another thing that I'm going to talk about in a minute as to why avoidants are hated, because that's a huge one. I just want to take a moment here to say that if your tendency is to downplay your involvement, to downplay the role of your fears in ending a situationship and relationship, then of course, people are going to find it very infuriating to relate to you, because whenever the times get tough, and I mean really tough, then they're going to feel like you're not there to support the relationship. You're not there to have someone's back. You're just going to cut and run whenever things feel hard for you. And whilst it may feel hard for you, it's not fair for the other person to feel alone, like they've got to hold on to the relationship and feel like it's their entire, responsibility to take care of it. Speaking of responsibility, why are avoidants hated? Because often they lack accountability and responsibility for a lot of their dating and relationships. Much of the time, if you try and call them out on things like their deactivating excuses like, I'm busy with work, I'm this, I'm that, or I'm just not feeling this anymore, they will just continue to often deny, downplay, gaslight, project, and make it seem like it's not a real issue, it's not a real concern, and it's made worse when you can sense that there is something wrong. They tell you everything's hunky-dory, and then subsequently go on to do something really bad, like break up the relationship after telling you everything was totally fine minutes before, when you could sense that something was clearly wrong. This combination of people-pleasing and lack of accountability and responsibility is frankly very immature, and a lot of people feel incredibly hurt by this kind of behavior, and is another major reason as to why a lot of avoidant attachers are hated, because they don't seemingly want to take accountability and responsibility for their side of the street when things get tough. So is it, is anyone surprised when this attachment group gets a lot of flack for a lot of the consistent behavior that they tend to make in dating, where they're not actually performing up to the role that they claim to be wanting much of the time when they're dating? That leads me on to people-pleasing. Another really painful aspect of dating people who have a severe avoidant attachment style is that often a lot of them will declare that they're looking for a relationship, or even if on one hand they say, yeah, I don't want a relationship, but they then behave in ways where they try and involve you very romantically, hanging out with you all the time, texting you in romantic hours, and also behaving in such ways where it feels like we are spending time, energy, and also affection that is not meant for just friendship, then you have every right to not only feel confused, but you have every right to feel really upset and bothered by how this person is trying to have their cake and eat it too, without actually making it a proper romantic relationship, because you're going to feel used, you're going to feel hurt. And it's not okay to just yank people by the chain, lead them on like that, if you want something that's more compartmentalized. If you just want intimacy without the label and without all of that, then you should be upfront and say that. I want to have an emotionally intimate relationship, but I don't want it to be an official romantic relationship. People have every right to opt out of that situation. But you masking it as, I don't want a relationship, but then proceeding to act like you do, or saying, I do want a romantic relationship, but then changing your mind a few months in and simply saying, oh, well, it was just a change of mind, when you've been telling this person, I've never felt this way with anyone else before. You treat me so much better than any of my exes. I really love you. Sorry, that's misleading. A person has every right to feel incredible betrayal and also feelings of being used by you if you do this, because you just sold a faulty car, dressing it up as a new Ferrari. And everyone has the right to feel like, I want the Ferrari back, not the secondhand car that you've left me with. So that is another reason as to why a lot of avoidant attachers are hated, because they're misleading and their people-pleasing behavior definitely contributes to that. Another adjacent issue that a lot of avoidant attachers have that is connected to a lot of this is also their addictions. And this is another reason as to why a lot of avoidant attachers are hated. Rather than dealing with their emotions, what do instead? Find coping mechanisms through work, drugs, alcohol, sex, etc. So this can make trying to connect with them, trying to unpack their emotions, trying to work through a lot of those difficult times together bloody hard when they're off doing their own thing, trying to compartmentalize. And I understand why they do that, but it can make it very difficult when you're trying to have an ongoing conversation with your partner and they're off having a bender where maybe they're even cheating on you because they feel like they're worthless. And rather than actually having a proper conversation with you about what they're feeling and trying to work through it with you, which is hard, I acknowledge that, they're making it even harder on you as a consequence, because you are now dealing with adultery as well as a possible affair and or many, rather than having a conversation around, when I get close to you, I feel like I am also not good enough for you. I feel like I'm not useful in this relationship. I don't know how I can be man enough. I don't know how I can be feminine enough in this relationship. And therefore, as a consequence, I then do stupid shit outside of this relationship to avoid being close and committed to you. Is it any wonder that as a consequence, people then feel even more hurt? Another reason as to why a lot of avoidant attachers are hated is because their self-sabotaging behaviors. A lot of this stuff, in theory, could have been avoided if they were more open and honest with how they were feeling with their partners, and they were taking more accountability for their fears. Then realistically, they could actually live up to the part of being in a relationship if they were more open and honest with the other parts of their experience as well too, which in a functional relationship should be part of the experience. They have every right to say, I don't know if I can maintain this kind of relationship forever. It's not meant to be fun and games all the time. That's unrealistic. If they were also upfront and clear about, I don't feel I'm worthy to be in this relationship, totally normal. Doesn't mean the relationship is bad, however. It's very important to actually have the ability to feel like you can communicate that. And most partners would die to be able to, offer that space for their avoidant partners, because many of them would feel like they were, they'd feel terrible at the fact of thinking that they had somehow done something wrong, that you didn't want to, speak up for these fears and concerns that you had. Instead, this becomes another act of self-sabotage that then ruins a lot of potentially great relationships, rather than trying to work it out and hash it out together as well too. Which leads on to another reason as to why a lot of avoidant attachers are hated, which is their communication deficits. The problem that a lot of people have when it comes to interacting with avoidant attachers is their limited communication skills, relationally speaking. Because many of them do not know how to speak up for themselves and their own emotions, it becomes incredibly frustrating when you're trying to have adult conversations where they try and duck and weave, bend the conversation, and try and avoid the proverbial elephants in the room just to feel safe, just to feel good in the relationship with you. I understand why they do it, but to be on the receiving end of it, it can be maddening because it can feel like your needs don't matter, your emotions certainly don't matter, and anything that's relevant to the health of the relationship, keep that off the table because your partner is going to be basically running to the hills anytime you talk about love, anytime you talk about where is this relationship going, anytime you talk about I need more of you in this relationship. It's not fair to feel as though my relationship could end if I talk about the relationship. That'd be like if you were working, for someone, and anytime you wanted to discuss your position at that job, or you wanted to discuss where that potential career trajectories were going, your career was about to come to an end because it upset and frazzled your manager. That should never happen in an employment structure at all. You should definitely feel as though, if provided there is an opportunity for growth and progression, that you have the capacity to talk about it without feeling like discussing it is going to result in termination shortly after. Also added to this too, another reason why avoidant attachers are hated is their hot and cold behaviour. Much of this again could be avoided if they needed time to regulate, take time for themselves, to work through their feelings. It would be wonderful if they could communicate that they need that time, that they need that space to stop feeling like they need to take so much ownership for other people's emotional baggage and also work on their own stuff and try and get that under control. This nicely leads into another reason as to why avoidant attachers are hated, which is the fact that a lot of them don't engage with therapy, don't engage in healing modalities that are actually working on their fear of intimacy, and instead opt for more pseudo-therapeutic modalities like spirituality, like finding some form of religion that helps them avoid the internal stuff that's going on inside of them. It can be incredibly frustrating having a partner who doesn't engage with the marriage counsellor, who doesn't engage with their own therapist, would much prefer to do acupuncture with their massage therapist than actually deal with the real issues that are contributing to the erosion of their relationship with their marriage counsellor. It can be really frustrating when you have a partner who knows that they have an avoidant attachment and they just won't do anything about it. Worse, anytime you bring it up, they get incredibly triggered and incensed and start getting very aggressive. And rather than see it as the basis for which you need to work on something, they now see it as the reason as to why, they've made everything about them and they can't feel proper in this relationship. And that's why we should break up this relationship because I don't feel good about myself. So I want to make it very clear that there are actually a lot of very valid reasons as to why avoidant attachers are hated. And again, I want to reiterate, not every avoidant attacher is a bad person. There are a lot of lovable avoidant attachers out there. Hell, I'd argue that most avoidant attachers are very lovable and are all deserving of love. But their behaviour, I don't care how traumatized they are, your trauma and your backstory ain't an excuse for shitty behaviour. The fact of the matter is that no matter how much baggage anyone has had, you do not get the right to do that kind of behaviour to another person, because the amount of damage it does to someone's nervous system, to someone's sense of self, and also your self-esteem is just not okay. And so if you think that just having this attachment label, means a get out of jail free card, think again. because it's simply not enough to just be aware that you have, these intimacy issues. If you have them and you are aware that you have them and you are not doing anything about them, you are being abusive. Frankly, even if you don't have the intention of being abusive, you have now entered the realm of abuse merely by the fact that you're not taking any action to work on this. I see a lot of avoidant attachers who've been through the ringer on this. They've dated someone who's got like a mega avoidant attachment style and also can recognize their own behavior and what they've done in the past. And some of them will swear off dating forever. Listen, if you want to be in that category of being a monk in the mountains, I'm not here to tell you what you should do. I am just here to say gently that that's probably a little bit too extreme. You don't need to go that far. But I do think that it's very important to take actionable steps to work on your fear of intimacy, lest it become the basis for trauma bonding yourself with other people and also making your life miserable. This kind of behavior pushes people away. And at the end of your days, because I've seen this happen far too often to ignore it, if you're going to be the kind of person that keeps pushing people away because of your fear of intimacy, that all you are left are with people who are cronies, narcissists, people who are just kind of emotionally vapid, that exacerbate your existing loneliness, that you feel as though you've got no one left. I gotta tell you, that is a silent death that will eat your soul over time to a point where you will have nobody you can turn to when real shit starts hitting the fan, when you have problems with your mental health, when your finances go through a moment where they aren't doing too well, when your job starts to fail on you. At the end of the day, when you push good people away and this is what you're left with, you are going to create a rock bottom so great that it may be too hard for you to come back from. So that's why I just want to make it very clear that if you are someone who has these tendencies, you really need to be thinking long and hard about working on yourself. And I'm going to go back to what I said in the beginning. I know that anxious attachers don't seemingly get the bad kind of rap that avoidant attachers have. Frankly, we on the anxious attacher side have plenty of things that we need to be working on because we can be pretty bad in our behavior at the extreme end, and we need a lot of work on ourselves as well too. But in saying that, I just want to make it very clear that when it comes to the anxious attacher side of the self, I just want to say, no, frankly, whilst we have some things that we really need to work on, and yes, there are some enabling, codependent, really dodgy behavior that we can exhibit too that we need to work on, this is not a balanced discussion at all as far as I'm concerned, because simply the damage that can be done on behalf of these very, like I said, these reasonably great people with intimacy issues is just staggeringly high. So I just want to put it out there and say, as far as I'm concerned, the avoidants have got way more work to do ahead of themselves than a lot of anxious attachers do. So that's my 2 cents on that. I can see someone here has said, my foolish self wants to save my avoidant ex from that fate. I just want to take a moment here to say, that's okay. I've certainly felt similarly as well too about one of my exes ages ago. And I want to make it clear that even though I have very strong views and opinions on where I stand with all of this, I want to make it clear that if you've come to this live and you're someone who's maybe, and you may never feel like you'll be at the same you'll be on the same page as me, that's totally fine. But if you're someone who still has a lot of love for your avoidant ex and you're just like, I want to, help them, I want to obviously try and re-engage with them, I love them still, I just want to say totally valid, totally fair, totally fine. There ain't a but coming to anything I'm about to say, because it is a phase that a lot of people go through where they're still trying to have a relationship with this kind of person. And I actually think it's good for you to try and see if you can make it work. Don't leave any stone unturned. I'm not being sarcastic, because I think one thing that's really important for people when they're going through the motions of dating someone who is potentially avoidantly attached, or definitely, is psychologically, I think a lot of us need to feel like we've done everything we can. We've turned every stone, we tried everything to make it work, and then eventually you get to a point where you're like, I've done everything I can. Or, miraculously, maybe we can turn this around. Maybe we can make this work out. So if that's the case and you can make it work, more power to you. I say give it a go. But I do want to just say that it's very important to be aware that where you're at right now is totally fair. It's totally okay to be where you're at. Please don't rush yourself, and don't think that just because I am talking about where I stand with all of this, you feel bad about yourself because you're not where I'm at. We're in two very different spaces right now, and that's totally fine. Please do not compare yourself to anyone else's stage in this journey of where you're at with this. If you're still very much in a fixation of loving your avoidant ex, have at it. Enjoy. Because like I said, these people are worthy of love. It would just be better if they were actually better at receiving and maintaining love as well too. I can see someone here has said, they are not acting the same way with family or friends, so they don't end alone and the rock bottom is far away. Okay, I want to make it very clear on what I mean by that. Just because an avoidant attacher is with friends and family doesn't mean they feel emotionally connected to those friends and family. Part of the reason why a lot of them seek out intimacy in others is because they weren't getting it from people that were closest to them. Just because they have great friends and family, and they probably have lots, doesn't mean that those friends and family are genuine, authentic, loving people. Just remember, what made them probably isn't what's healthy for them as well too. Meaning that a lot of these people have grown up with developmental trauma. I wonder where that came from. Oh, that's right. Probably came from their caregivers. And even if it wasn't directly from their caregivers, it also likely may have been something that came from a generation before that as well too, or so on. The point is that when it comes to connection, love, and being able to feel like you're not actually alone, that is a very, very complex thing to overcome. When you want to try and bond with someone, that means being able to emotionally connect with another human being. And if you don't have the skill set to do that, then what makes you think that having all these friends and family is necessarily going to facilitate that if you can't sustain that with the people around you, that you're so thirsty that you need to go out onto dating apps and find it in other people? There are plenty of avoidant attachers who are in marriages where they're having affairs because they couldn't find love with their current partner, that they need to search for it outside of it because they're still unhappy. So that's why I just want to make it very clear that even if an avoidant attacher has plenty of friends, has a reasonably good family around them, doesn't mean the issue's been resolved inside of themselves. They have got a lot of emotional dysregulation going on, and they need often at times a proverbial village to be able to work through a lot of their internal stuff. All right, I'm going to switch over to Q&A. I'm going to work my way through some of these. I have a funny feeling my phone is going to kick me off here before my health does. So I will let everyone know when I'm about to sort of wind down. Let's get into it. I see someone here has said, I feel so used and traumatized by giving my ex chance after chance. He left 3 times. Hello, fearful avoidant, or possibly fearful avoidant. Only for him to blame me for him leaving in the end when I took his shitty behavior for 2 years. I'm rolling my eyes because that's fucking terrible. Firstly, I'm so sorry that you've gone through that experience. Very quickly, I can see some people here have asked me how I'm feeling. Short answer is I'm feeling a lot better. If you'd asked me this time last week, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Thank you to everyone for your patience and also your warm wishes for my health. Influenza is an absolute bitch. So I'm really sorry to anyone who's gone through an experience like that. But my answer is sleep and tons of vitamin C, preferably in liquid form. Let's go back to this person. So basically this person's describing how they feel so traumatized that their presumably avoidant ex has left them 3 times, and on the last time blame them as to the reasons as to why they left. Let us assume based on this scenario, that you had done nothing wrong in terms of, how you behaved. Let us assume that you have behaved reasonably well. You showed up, you communicated reasonably well, you were a functional human being in this relationship. And by functional, I mean you weren't shouting, you weren't, doing anything that would be constituted as, what's the term used? You weren't acting out or playing out any of your trauma. You were someone who was, trying to be reasonable and secure in your relationship. A little easier said than done when you're in a situation like this. But for the most part, there was there was no egregious red flags on your side of the street, okay? So it would be pretty damn traumatic to have someone at the end of the third time of when they've broken up with you, and I'm assuming they're the one who keeps deciding to break up with you, basically make it out you're the problem. That's a horrible thing to do to anyone. And it's not okay to feel like at round 3, it's suddenly all on you and this person's not willing to take any accountability for this. It's like, okay, person who you were dating, did you seriously go back into this only then to blame your partner for why you left? If you were the one who was constantly ending it, then choosing to return, you have very much got a lot to own up to as well in this dynamic. It's probably not all on this person you are seeing, and it's simply not okay to just make it out like everything's this person's fault as to why things aren't working. I also want to add here, and people who know me from watching a lot of my videos will know what I'm about to say, which is going through a boomerang avoidance cycle, regardless of whether they're fearful or dismissive, although I am sensing more fearful with this one, I gotta tell ya, it is the worst. I think that those one and dones, as brutal as they are, can be in some way a blessing in disguise in comparison to the shittiness of these on and off cycles of when you're going through that sort of classic boomerang style of relationship with someone who's got an avoidant attachment style, because it just basically makes you feel like you're being controlled by the other person, which is another reason as to why a lot of avoidant attachers are hated, because they are very good covert controllers in their relationships. What are they trying to control? The amount of intimacy they share between them and you in the relationship. They're perfectly happy chasing you, trying to have a honeymoon period, but the minute it gets real, the minute it gets good, the minute you turn around and go back, yeah, I do love you too, and I could see this becoming a great relationship, that's all they wrote before they, things just de-escalate from there. Oh, sorry, just give me one sec. That was just my phone going off. And again, I want to make it clear, I get the trauma stuff. I understand where it all comes from. Done plenty of conversations around that. This is not a conversation understanding the why. This is a conversation just centering on how this behavior makes people feel and why, as a consequence, people hate avoidant attachers because of all this this lunacy that happens as a consequence. And frankly, I've got to be honest, even as a mental health professional, when I hear this sort of stuff, I roll my eyes a lot of the time because I'm just like, oh, Jesus Christ. I get, again, where it all comes from, but being on the receiving end of this behavior over and over again, under the spell of intermittent reinforcement, and also feeling like you're in a trauma bond, not fun. Not fun at all, and it does a number to your mental health as well too. So yeah, not okay. I think someone here has just said, sorry, 21 times, each time literally saying he loves me but then getting rid of me. Yeah, that's not okay. I can see someone here has said, my ex left 17 times. I gotta be honest, when people say to me like they had an avoidant ex who came back around like 5 times, not to sound invalidating, but I often think that's kind of small compared to some avoidant cases I've heard where, the fearful avoidant in particular has been around for at least 17 years and it's just been an on and off situationship for 17 years or longer. So when I hear that, my brain goes, hey, to anyone who's in there, you're not alone. And at the end of the day, the number doesn't really matter. It's how it makes you feel when you're going through that yo-yo boomerang cycle. It's just garbage. Might as well be 100 times or just 2. The fact of the matter is, 2 is just as bad as 100 times, and at the end of the day, it can do such damage to your nervous system. This person says, I was unilaterally discarded, blindsided by his reasons without the opportunity to rectify anything. He wanted to friend zone me, but I went into no contact. I got whiplash from his mixed signals. Yeah, I bet you did. I'm sorry you've gone through that because that's terrible. This person says, if they are taking zero responsibility now, do they ever later on realize they are avoidant? Can they come around eventually? And if so, how long does it take for them to assume accountability? That's just the warning from my phone telling me I've got 20% left, so I'll see how I go answering everyone's questions. Short answer is, sometimes it won't. Like, sometimes a lot of these individuals, a lot of them know that they have a fear of intimacy. They know that there's something wrong inside of them. Do they want to admit it? No, because it would confirm a lot of their deepest fears and their internal belief systems around being defective and being a bad person. So they've got that to contend with. Do some of them eventually turn around and realize this and want to work on it? Absolutely they do. But I got to tell you, it takes them a long time to sometimes work and also confront a lot of this stuff. We're talking decades sometimes. And the healing through therapy takes an equally long amount of time as well too. So it's not on your timeline, that's for sure. What is the link between cheating and avoidance? The link is that if you are an avoidant attacher and you also don't feel particularly good about your self-worth, and one of your coping mechanisms might be porn and also sleeping around, you might find that if you start to get close to another person, emotionally speaking, it freaks you out and it causes you to then cheat on the person you're seeing by being with other people to make yourself feel better. This probably would play out, especially if you had a history where you felt like you were out of control, like you felt like decisions were made for you by your caregivers, and or you had a very emotionally incestuous relationship with a caregiver, where, say, for example, I'm just using this as a stereotype because it's quite a big one. Let's just say you are a man who grew up with an overbearing mum and something inside of you remembered that feeling of having no agency in your relationship with your mum, that now anytime you get close to a woman, you have to find a way to sabotage it. Anytime, a woman tries to have a boundary with you and you feel controlled, you feel the need to get back at her by like looking at tons of, women on social media and cheating on your partner to feel better about yourself. That's the link. It's all based on self-worth. It's based on, a lot of the history stuff as well too. Anxious attachers can definitely cheat as well too, but they're more inclined to do it when they're not getting their emotional needs met, and they'll do it for very immature reasons. But avoidance will do it much more because they feel intense shame and they think you're causing the shame. You're making them feel out of control, or in this case, controlled, that they have to seek that control away from you by cheating on you. That's where I'd say the link is. So I hope that makes sense. All right, I'm going to jump to Q&A. I don't know why my thing just went to a green screen like that, but whatever. All right, I'm going to see if I can answer as many questions in the time that I have left. All right, I've got time. Let's do this. All right, so what is fear of intimacy exactly? What are some examples of fear of intimacy and how to spot it before it gets worse? Okay. Fear of intimacy is when you have I'm just trying to use words outside of fear. Basically, it's when you get scared of being emotionally vulnerable and close to another person. It doesn't mean exclusively romantic feelings. This can also include friendship, family members. Basically, what it means is that when you get emotionally close to another person and you're starting to get deeper and more involved with that person, like, for example, you're starting to feel like this person I'm seeing is starting to get to see parts of me that I don't want them to see. I'm worried that if we get close, they're not going to really like me at all. It's better if we end up actually breaking up at this point because it's not going to be particularly good for us. that's where that fear of intimacy starts to play up a bit. And by play up, what I mean is it manifests when the avoidant attacher decides to, end things abruptly with the friend, lover, family member, and back away all of a sudden, and come up with a bunch of garbled, rationalized excuses as to why they don't want to interact with you as much as they were before. Saying things like, oh, if, I'm feeling this way, well, clearly you're not the one for me. I just want more spark. I really want more Hollywood chemistry. You give me chemistry, but I'm looking for more chemistry. I love you, but I don't love you. When you start hearing someone come up with all these confusing reasons as to why this isn't working, that's when, it becomes in the realm of someone who's acting out their fear of intimacy. And in terms of when to spot it, usually if you're an avoidant attacher, we tell our clients, if you start to notice that you're having preoccupying thoughts around an ex, you're starting to fantasize about a previous ex, if you are having breakup urges with a partner, but these urges come out of you for no particular reason, you're like, I like my partner, so why am I feeling this way? If you find that you're someone who's obsessing and also starting to flaw find with your partner, you are now entering into the realm of fear of intimacy, where you're potentially going to end something before it has a chance to really become a proper relationship. So that's where, if you find that fear of intimacy is coming up, that's where it manifests much of the time. So I hope that answers the question. If honestly, when people talk to me about avoidant attachment or any attachment style, my brain often goes to, okay, well, how is the fear of abandonment or the fear of intimacy playing out? Because even if you don't like the labels, and look, a lot of people don't, if you don't like the labels of you're avoidant, you're anxious, you're fearful avoidant, dismissive avoidant, whatever it may be, you can often go to the more shorthand, which is just, where is that fear of intimacy playing out in this relationship? Where is that fear of abandonment playing out in this relationship? And fear of intimacy is not as well known or as well, it's not as visible compared to some of those more, protesty behaviors that we see with fear of abandonment. Fear of abandonment, in my opinion, is quite easy to spot because you're like, oh, there it is. That person wants reassurance. That person wants more time with me. That person wants X, Y, Z. It's more, in my experience and my opinion, and I'm being subjective here, it's a bit more obvious to be like, oh yeah, that's that person who's, having a fear of abandonment pop up, versus fear of intimacy, which is very confusing because it's very oxymoronic. Why would someone who wants connection and intimacy repel it? Oh, because it also would mean that person would have to reveal other parts of themselves too, which they don't necessarily want to reveal as well too. So that's where it gets really confusing to understand at times, and it can be quite oxymoronic. All right, next question. How can I help or at least motivate my dismissive avoidant ex with fearful avoidant tendencies who's aware of his behavior and even the consequences you evoked previously to seek professional help? Okay, great question. Generally speaking, avoidants hate any mention of their issues, and even if they own the fact that they have a problem with intimacy, they don't usually want to be the ones, they don't want to usually be told to go to therapy for a lot of their stuff. So if you want to do it, I'd say if it were me and that behavior was having a direct impact on me, which to be honest, I have had people whose, avoidant behavior has affected me, I might go, if I felt like it was appropriate and that person was open to it, I'd first say, hey, I'm not reaching out because I want to necessarily reconnect with you in a romantic relationship. I'm just reconnecting because, something has come to my mind that I think would actually be appropriate based on the conversations we've both shared about behavior you've discussed in relation to yourself. Do you have the bandwidth just to have a brief conversation around it? Yes or no? And I say that because, one, no one loves unsolicited, requests to go to therapy. Two, as this person says here, they really have to want to help themselves. Unfortunately, completely agree. But if we stick with, your desire to try and help them. Three, this is about giving them consent. This is about asking them, are you okay with having this conversation? And if they say no, respect their wish. Let them do what they will. And if they say, yeah, okay, I'm happy to listen to this, here's how I would say it. I'd say, hey, I think you're a great person. I really enjoy spending time with you. What I'm about to say is not intended as criticism. I'm just merely wanting to just say, based on the way in which we interacted, I couldn't help but feel that some of the behavior that impacted me felt a bit like it was coming from a place of maybe fear of intimacy or avoidant attachment. I know those words may not necessarily agree with you. It's not meant to be criticism, but I know based on everything I've looked into, this is not something that you can heal on your own. It's something that I think, needs to be worked on in therapy. If you're willing to work on it, fantastic. If not, so be it, more power to you. But I personally just wanted to share that with you because this behavior did impact me. And I know that you are worthy of love. And I'd hate to see what what happened to us happen to anyone else. But that's probably what I would say. But I'm going to be completely honest. A lot of them aren't usually willing to hear that sort of stuff. Guys, I'm just going to quickly turn on my lights and then I'm going to come back and answer as many questions or my thing decides to just bounce for the night. So just give me 1 sec. Thanks, guys. All right, let's continue. So let's go to another one. I can see someone here has asked, what can I do to make my ex-avoidant work on themselves? Should I tell him about how what they did is a classically avoidant move? I'm actually going to answer this one because even though it sounds very similar to the last question, I think there are slight nuances here that I want to address that make it a little bit different to the last question. So firstly, if you want to tell your avoidant ex to work on themselves, I'd say listen to what I just said in the previous answer to that question. But the second part of your question, which is, should I tell them what they did to me is classically avoidant? You can. Because if you find that this behavior has affected you, and to be completely honest, why would you be at my account if it didn't affect you? I think you have every right to go back to this person and say, hey, I just want to let you know that this behavior really hurt me. Now, I also think that a lot of this behavior is very consistent with what I've been reading with avoidant attachment. And I really do think that you should work on this because it would really affect someone if they try and interact with you. And it's not okay for anyone to have to go through this, considering I'm in therapy. I'm now healing off the back of this. It's taken me months or years to work on this sort of stuff. And it really, really hurt. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that in theory, but I want to make it very clear. They have to realize in their own time when they want to work on this, and the chances of them working on this, they usually have to go through at least a few more people first before they realize that they want to work on this, and it takes them quite a while, and not many of them will ever work on this, so it's a bit unfortunate in that regard. Someone here has asked, are avoidants often sex addicts? Yes. In fact, I don't think I've ever met someone who's traditionally anxiously attached who has a sex addiction. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I'm going to say that, it's it's probably not the case. My pleasure to my later days. You're very welcome. Someone here has asked, how to stop enabling an avoidant loved one? I try to have patience for their avoidance, but it feels like I'm enabling the behavior. I'm assuming that the loved one you're talking to is someone who's like a friend, or as someone who you're associated with, but you're not in a romantic relationship with, meaning that you can see their avoidant behavior being played out, but you're not really being affected by it romantically, but just listening to it play out is affecting you enough to the point where you're like, I feel like I'm getting involved. Okay. If you're in this situation where you feel as though this person's behavior is, starting to go against your values, you could say to them before, look, just to put it out like this, I wouldn't just cut this person out of your life straight away. what I would do is, if it were me, I might go to them and say, hey, I really enjoy hanging out with you as a friend. What's going on here between you and your loved one, your partner, I find, to be honest, like, it troubles me at times, and it really does actually put a dent in my enthusiasm for us as friends, and I really love us as friends. Can we just stick to talking about other things? Because at times I feel like I'm actually enabling this behavior, and I think that honestly at times this behavior, it doesn't agree with me, and I don't necessarily want that to be the basis to which we end up, not communicating and hanging out as much together. That's probably how I'd say it. Because you're saying, can we just compartmentalize your avoidant lifestyle with the parts of us that actually work out really, really well? I think it's perfectly reasonable to say that. And see how they respond. They might actually be very agreeable and just continue to stick to things that are outside of that. But if you feel like you're behaving in such a way where you feel like you're quite involved with how they're behaving and also their other avoidant stuff that's going on, probably a problem there that's going on too. So yeah. I can see someone here has asked, and due to their intimacy problems, can they also have some dysfunctional sexual problems? They absolutely can. And this can apply for men and women and people in general. Meaning that if you have an insecure attachment, and let's just say if you're avoidantly attached, fearful and or dismissive, I often find that what this can mean is that you may be prone to particular issues in bed. If you're a guy, for instance, you may be more likely to be someone with erectile dysfunctional issues when you're getting close to someone. You may actually find that you actually have so much anxiety that you can't perform because you're so worried about losing your sense of control when you're with another person. You may find, and this is applicable regardless of regardless of gender, you end up actually getting really tired very easily in sex because you're afraid of being close to another person as well too. So it can be like, have you got narcolepsy or something? And no, it's a defensive mechanism to being that close to someone. You might find that you, as an avoidant, also can be the complete opposite, where you're hypersexual, but then anytime you spend time with an intimate partner, you get the ick and you don't want to spend any time with them sexually at all. So yeah, it can be very much hyper or hypo in terms of the dysfunctionality, for sure. What's the difference between fearful and dismissive avoidance? That is a question that could require such a lengthy video response that I'm going to make it really simplistic. A dismissive avoidant is someone who has an active fear of intimacy with a subconscious fear of abandonment, versus a fearful avoidant who's also called the disorganized attacher, who has a fear of abandonment and also a conscious fear of intimacy. The way it might play out is that the dismissive avoidant is someone who's seemingly very calm, stoic, put together, has very negative views of relationships and also of other people, and they just carry themselves off as being quite independent and aloof. And they might have a lot of needy people around them, and they provide willingly to these people who are just takers. But when they have intimate relationships, that's when they freak out over time and they push people away. Whereas fearful avoidant attachers tend to be much more emotionally erratic. They tend to be very flighty, and in the early stages of dating can appear almost anxiously attached in their behavior. But when they get what they seemingly want, that's when the avoidance side pulls up and they push people away. And these people are much more inclined to engage in the boomerang cycle than the dismissives, mostly because their fear of abandonment really gets quite activated, and they tend to boomerang from people to people and also look for a lot of sex and validation to feel better about themselves. Both of them have extremely low self-worth, but the dismissive tends to mask it better because they think that their state of being, their dissociative state, is normal. So they tend to play it off and shrug off a lot of their own flaws as just part of their character. They don't see it as much of a problem. All right, I'm going to quickly speed run the questions that are in the question mark box. All right. How many avoidants can't work with their anxiety like most of us do? breathing exercises, for example. Is there a difference between their kind of fears and anxiety and those I feel having secure attachment? They can do breathing exercises, and they certainly can do a lot of grounding work too. It's very good for them, and so is meditation. The problem is they have resistances to what happens when they do that. You see, they're looking to distract themselves from what's going on up here. They don't want to touch that shit. So the minute they engage with those activities, that's when the shit hits the fan. And they then have to confront a lot of the stuff that's been berating them and attacking them emotionally up until this point. That's why, there's such resistance to working through a lot of their emotional stuff. So please bear in mind that the initial stage of the initial part of doing the work of healing may seem appealing until they realize what it actually involves, because a lot of them just want to get away from a lot of the internal stuff that they're going through. They don't want to engage with it. So people who are already in the throes of their emotions kind of know how to weather the storm better than an avoidant attacher who's actively trying to, keep their bunker afloat from the emotional crap that's going on outside of them. I can see someone here has asked, can an avoidance fear of intimacy make them fear being physically close to you? Yeah, it absolutely can. That's one way I can play it out for sure. Someone here's asked, am I accepting letters for Ken reads? I have about 10 letters that I still have to get through, and I really want to just take my time getting through them. So short answer is not yet, but in September I will start accepting them. I'm just trying to work my way through that which I have at the moment, and I will then eventually be okay, I'm at a point where I'm willing to accept more. But another thing too also to think about is I don't want to accept too many letters just yet, because I worry that if I do, it's going to cause problems where I end up with a huge list and I won't get to any of them properly. Guys, I don't know what's going on with my filter. For some reason, it's made me fluorescent. I don't know if it's the battery or something, but I'm actually going to call it quits here on the live, because this is, just not a particularly fun experience to watch myself look like I'm in some sort of exorcist paranormal activity experience. So I apologize for ending it abruptly here. I will still upload this video. Hopefully the technical issues don't also manifest at the back half of this video, but I will be back again this week doing more Q&A with a Ken Read segment. All right, everyone, take care of yourself. Thank you very much for the best wishes, and I wish you guys all the best.